Rome once cheered his name. Crowds celebrated. The Senate applauded. People believed a golden age had begun. A young emperor, the blood of Caesar, hope for a calmer Rome. But something went terribly wrong. Very wrong. How does a beloved ruler become one of history's most feared tyrants? How does power turn into madness? And where is the line between insanity and absolute authority? This is the story of a man who didn't just rule Rome, he terrified it. A man who demanded worship, who laughed during executions, who treated fear as a political tool. Some called him insane, others called him evil. But Rome called him emperor. He was born into greatness, raised among soldiers, surrounded by loyalty. And yet, within just a few years, the same people who praised him began whispering his name in fear. Because Caligula didn't want respect. He wanted obedience. He didn't want loyalty. He wanted worship. This is not just a story about madness. It is a warning about what happens when no one can say no. Before the statues were torn down, before the knives were drawn, before Rome breathed a sigh of relief, there was a boy called Little Boots, and that boy would become a nightmare. This is the rise of Caligula. Fact 1. The people loved him at first. When Caligula first became emperor, Rome celebrated. Crowds filled the streets. The Senate applauded. And for a brief moment, the Roman people believed their nightmare was over. Caligula was young, charismatic, and carried a powerful name. He was the son of the beloved general Germanicus, a man adored by both the army and the people. To Rome, Caligula didn't feel like a random ruler. He felt like destiny. At the beginning of his reign, Caligula ruled with generosity. He released political prisoners. He recalled exiles. He canceled unfair taxes. He organized massive public games and festivals to entertain the people. After years of fear under Emperor Tiberius, Rome finally felt free again. Ancient writers describe how people praised Caligula openly. Some even compared him to a savior sent by the gods. For the first few months, there were no mass executions, no terror, no madness, just hope. Coins were minted with his image. Statues were raised in his honor. The people trusted him. And this is what makes Caligula's story so disturbing. Because the man Rome once loved would soon become the emperor Rome feared the most. And the same crowds that cheered his name would later whisper it in terror. Fact 2. He declared himself a god. After the early months of popularity, something changed. Caligula no longer wanted to be loved. He wanted something far more dangerous. He wanted worship. In ancient Rome, emperors were respected, honored, even glorified after death. But Caligula broke that rule. He demanded divine status while still alive. He ordered statues of Roman gods to be altered, their heads removed and replaced with his own. Temples meant for Jupiter or Apollo were suddenly connected to Caligula's image. And it didn't stop there. Caligula appeared in public dressed as different gods, as Jupiter, as Apollo, even as Venus. He demanded sacrifices in his name. He forced senators to address him not as emperor, but as a living god. Refusing was not an option. To Rome's elite, this was terrifying, because declaring yourself a god meant something very clear. You are above the law. You cannot be questioned. You cannot be opposed. Religion became a weapon. Fear replaced tradition. Ancient writers describe senators trembling as they performed rituals meant to honor Caligula's divinity, knowing that a single wrong gesture could mean death. For the Roman people, the message was clear. Caligula was no longer ruling Rome. He believed Rome existed to worship him. This moment marked a turning point. From that day forward, power was no longer limited by custom, law, or sanity. It was absolute. And absolute power, when treated as divine, becomes something far more dangerous than madness. It becomes untouchable. Fact 3. He ruled through fear. Caligula did not believe loyalty was enough. He believed fear was stronger. Very quickly, Rome learned that power under Caligula came with no safety. Not for senators, not for generals, not even for his closest allies. Executions became unpredictable. Men were arrested without charges, trials were rushed, or skipped entirely. Punishments were public, sudden, and often cruel. Caligula wanted Rome to understand one thing clearly: No one was safe. Ancient sources describe how senators lived in constant terror. They never knew if a joke, a glance, or a pause in speech would be interpreted as disrespect. Caligula enjoyed this fear. He once declared, "Let them hate me, as long as they fear me." This was not accidental cruelty. It was strategy. Fear kept people silent. Fear kept opposition invisible. Fear replaced law. Even his friends were not spared. Caligula executed relatives, advisors, and political allies without hesitation. Trust meant nothing. Proximity to power only increased danger. Public executions became spectacles, not justice, but warnings. Rome stopped speaking openly. Conversations moved to whispers. Faces learned to hide emotion. Under Caligula, survival depended not on innocence, but on staying unnoticed. This reign of terror did not last long, but it left a permanent mark, because Caligula proved something terrifying. An emperor does not need love to rule. Fear is enough. And once fear becomes the foundation of power, everyone, even the ruler himself, becomes a prisoner of it. Fact 4. He spent the empire's wealth on personal pleasure. Power did not just change Caligula's behavior, it drained Rome's treasury. At the beginning of his reign, the imperial khazina was full, carefully managed under previous emperors. But under Caligula, money stopped being a tool of governance. It became a toy. Caligula spent vast amounts of public wealth on his own pleasures. Lavish banquets lasted for days. Gold was used not for defense or infrastructure, but for decoration and excess. Ancient sources describe ships covered in gold, floating palaces built purely for entertainment. He organized extravagant feasts where food was wasted simply to show that he could afford to waste it. He rewarded favorites with fortunes. He paid performers and companions more than generals. He treated the empire's wealth as if it belonged only to him. Within a short time, the khazina was empty. To refill it, Caligula turned to desperation. He imposed sudden taxes. He confiscated property from wealthy citizens. He accused people of crimes simply to seize their estates. Even the courts became tools of profit. Justice was no longer about law. It was about money. For the Roman people, this was devastating. Public trust collapsed. Economic pressure increased, and fear returned, this time not only of execution, but of ruin. Caligula proved something dangerous. When a ruler sees the state as personal property, the empire itself becomes disposable. Rome could survive wars, it could survive enemies, but it struggled to survive an emperor who spent its future on his own amusement. Fact 5. He ruled for only 4 years. Despite the fear, the excess, and the absolute power he claimed, Caligula's reign was shockingly short. He ruled the Roman Empire for only 4 years, from 37 to 41 AD. At first glance, 4 years may not seem extraordinary, but for an emperor who ruled through terror, demanded worship, and treated the empire as personal property, 4 years was an eternity, and yet it was also his limit. As time passed, Caligula's behavior became increasingly unpredictable. His cruelty alienated the Senate, his arrogance angered the elite, his instability terrified even his own guards. Most dangerous of all, he no longer trusted anyone. Executions increased, suspicions multiplied. Loyalty meant nothing. The people feared him, the Senate hated him, and the Praetorian Guard, the very men meant to protect him, began to see him as a threat to their own survival. Caligula ruled as if he were untouchable, but Rome had seen this before. History shows that tyrants rarely fall from outside invasion. They fall from within. In January of 41 AD, after only 4 years on the throne, Caligula was assassinated by members of his own guard. His reign ended not with a war, not with a trial, but with a knife in a palace corridor. 4 years. That was all it took for absolute power to destroy itself. And in that short time, Caligula proved a brutal lesson. When fear becomes the foundation of rule, the clock is already ticking. Fact 6. The horse named Incitatus. One story about Caligula is so famous that it still shocks people today. It is the story of his horse. The horse's name was Incitatus. To Caligula, Incitatus was not just an animal. He treated the horse better than many Roman citizens. Ancient sources claim that Incitatus lived in luxury. The horse had a marble stable, ivory feeding troughs, purple blankets, a color reserved for royalty. Even servants assigned only to care for him. But Caligula didn't stop there. He reportedly announced his intention to make Incitatus a senator, and possibly even a consul, one of the highest political offices in Rome. Was this madness? Maybe. But many historians believe there was something far more deliberate behind it. By elevating his horse above the Senate, Caligula was sending a message. Your titles mean nothing. I decide who has power. It was humiliation, not humor. A demonstration that Rome's most respected institution could be mocked at will. If a horse could become a senator, then law, tradition, and honor were meaningless. For the Senate, this was unbearable. It proved that Caligula did not see them as partners in power, but as toys. Whether Caligula truly planned to grant the title or simply used the threat as psychological torture, the impact was the same. Authority was reduced to a joke, and Rome understood something terrifying. If power could be given to a horse, it could be taken from anyone. The story of Incitatus is not just absurd, it is a symbol of what happens when absolute power loses all restraint and turns governance into humiliation. Fact 7. Fake wars and absurd commands. Caligula didn't just rule through fear and humiliation. He turned war itself into a performance. One of the strangest episodes of his reign took place on the northern coast of the empire. Caligula gathered his soldiers, fully armed, and marched them to the shoreline. The men expected battle. Instead, Caligula gave an unbelievable order. He declared war on the sea. According to ancient sources, Caligula commanded his soldiers to advance toward the waves, strike the water with their weapons, and then collect seashells from the shore. These shells, he announced, were the spoils of victory, trophies taken from the sea god himself. To the soldiers, it was confusing. To the Senate, it was humiliating. To Rome, it was terrifying. Because this was not a joke. It was power without restraint. By issuing absurd commands and forcing obedience, Caligula proved a dangerous point. Reality no longer mattered. Only his will did. Refusing such an order would mean punishment or death. So the army obeyed. Historians still debate Caligula's intentions. Was this madness, a mockery of military tradition, or a deliberate attempt to show that even war, Rome's most sacred institution, existed only at his command? Whatever the reason, the message was clear. Caligula could redefine victory. He could rewrite meaning, and he could turn the most serious acts of the empire into theater. For Rome, this was another warning sign. An emperor who treats war as a joke will eventually treat lives the same way. Fact 8. He changed after a severe illness. At the beginning of his reign, Caligula was not the monster history remembers. But then, only a few months after becoming emperor, something happened. Caligula became gravely ill. Ancient sources describe a sudden and serious sickness, one so severe that many believed he would die. Rome waited. Prayers were offered. The future of the empire seemed uncertain. And then, Caligula survived. But the man who recovered was not the same man. After his illness, his behavior changed dramatically. He became cruel where he had once been generous, paranoid where he had once been trusting, obsessed with power where he had once sought approval. Historians have long debated what this illness was. Some suggest encephalitis. Others believe it was severe epilepsy, meningitis, or even poisoning. There are also theories of psychological trauma triggered by sudden absolute power. Whatever the cause, the effect was undeniable. Caligula began to see enemies everywhere. He lost patience for disagreement. He acted impulsively, violently, and without restraint. Those closest to him noticed the change immediately. Fear replaced loyalty. Uncertainty replaced hope. This illness did not simply weaken Caligula's body. It may have unlocked something darker, or removed whatever limits once restrained him. Was it madness, or was it power finally freed from conscience? We may never know. But one thing is certain. The Caligula who emerged from that sickness was the Caligula Rome would come to fear. Fact 9. He was assassinated by his own guards. Caligula's reign did not end in battle. It ended in betrayal. By the year 41 AD, fear had reached its limit. The Senate hated him, the elite despised him, and even the Praetorian Guard, his personal protectors, were no longer loyal. They were afraid. Caligula had threatened officers, humiliated guards, and executed men without warning. Power had become unpredictable, and unpredictable power is dangerous to everyone around it. So a decision was made. During a routine walk through a palace corridor, Caligula was attacked. Daggers were drawn, blows were struck again and again. He was killed not by enemies of Rome, but by those sworn to protect him. His wife and young daughter were also murdered shortly afterward, a brutal attempt to erase his bloodline. When the news spread, Rome did not riot. Rome exhaled. Ancient writers describe relief, not grief. Caligula's death was not mourned. It was accepted as necessary. His assassination proved a timeless rule of history. A ruler who governs through fear will eventually be destroyed by it. Fact 10. Rome tried to erase him from history. Caligula was dead, but Rome was not finished with him. After his assassination, the Senate attempted something drastic. They tried to erase him from history. This practice was known as damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. Statues of Caligula were destroyed or defaced. His name was removed from inscriptions. Coins bearing his image were melted down. Rome wanted to pretend he had never existed. But here is the irony. The harder Rome tried to erase Caligula, the more unforgettable he became. Because silence does not erase fear, it preserves it. Ancient historians wrote about him not to honor him, but to warn future generations. Was Caligula truly insane, or was he something even more terrifying? A ruler who understood exactly how far power could go when no one dared to resist. Historians still debate this question, but one truth remains clear. Caligula became a symbol, not just of madness, but of what happens when absolute power is unleashed without limits. Rome tried to forget him. History refused. And today, nearly 2,000 years later, his name still stands as a warning. Power does not corrupt slowly. Sometimes, it explodes. Caligula ruled Rome for only 4 years, but in that short time, he showed the world how quickly power can turn into terror. He was loved, then feared, praised, then hunted, worshipped as a god, then erased like a mistake. Rome tried to delete his name from history, but history didn't let them, because Caligula was not just a mad emperor. He was a warning that when no one can say no, when fear replaces law, and when power becomes personal, the fall is only a matter of time. Caligula is gone, but the lesson he left behind is still very much alive.